Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome the Faculty Secretary of Faculty of Arts and Letters, Assistant Professor Maria Zenia M. Rodriguez, MEM, the main moderator of today's event.
May we request the audience to put their speakers in mute before we start the program? Let us put ourselves in the presence of God for the invocation by the Faculty of Arts and Letters, Chorus of Arts and Letters.
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace.
Doveci odio, lascialo seminare amore.
Where there is hatred, let me sow love.
Dove ci è ferita, perdona. Dove ci è dubbio, fede. Dove ci è spersione,
Where there is despair,
sperare.
oh,
Dove ci è
where there is darkness, light, where there is sadness, joy.
Divine Master, grant that I may not so much sin, to be consoled as to console,
To be understood as to understand,
to be loved as to
love.
For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are born again. It is in dying that we are born again. It is in dying that we are born again to eternal life. Mi rendero nostro mento della vostra pace.
Lord, make me,
Il Signore
an instrument of your peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Philippine National Anthem by the Chorus of Arts and Letters.
Bayang magiliw, pelas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi hindi mo yan sa langit mong banghaw. May dilagang tulya at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pag may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya ng pag may mag-aapi, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Good morning. Welcome to the 57th Thomas More Lecture of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, an annual and honored tradition held by our academic unit. This event is the first St. Thomas More Lecture held via Zoom cloud meeting, and we are happy that through this we're able to reach more audience to join this event. This year, we commemorate the 543rd birth anniversary of St. Thomas More, a beloved English statesman and saint, most loved for his spiritual courage. Having acquired a high spiritual and political reputation, St. Thomas More was beatified by Pope Leo XIII in 1886, about 250 years after his death. He was canonized in 1935, 400 years after his execution, and was declared the heavenly patron of statesmen and politicians. And now to give the welcome remarks for this morning's lecture, let us welcome the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, Professor Marilu R. Madruni.
Thank you very much, Zen. Good morning to our esteemed speaker, Professor Rosales. Good morning also to our Father Regent. Good morning to my colleagues in the faculty, my co-faculty, and likewise the students of Arts and Letters. Prior to the pandemic in early 2020, I remember meeting the Faculty Council for recommendations as regards the St. Thomas More Lecturer for academic year 2019-2020. The recommendation was approved in no time, and the scholar recommended came with the name of Professor Mary Rosales of the Ateneo de Manila University. Weeks after, we saw the need to move the date at least twice due to conflicting schedules until we had to finally cancel it when the pandemic finally broke out. Today, which is a year after, we will finally be able to listen to the lecture of our guest speaker. Since we are now going virtual, we are less affected by sudden changes in social connectivity unless the change comes in the form of internet disconnections. The COVID pandemic brought about unexpected changes, big and small, to our daily lives, and some of these might even remain for a longer period. Virtual appointments with doctors or the telehealth, consumer behavior with customers shopping online is now at an increasing pace. Increase in remote work, which also allows us to finish at home our work, which used to be done in the office, and the decline of the brick and mortar type of instruction. Perhaps we can expect these to become a regular part of the post-pandemic's new normal. The pandemic forced a host of changes to how we live and work. And in one article I read in November last year, written by Alvin Powell, a Harvard staff writer, he said, and I quote, "The pressures that we now experience may have ebbed and flowed with the outbreak's progress, and that when it all recedes in the likely not too distant future, experts expect older, more familiar ways of doing things to return, and undoing some of the changes we've seen since March." End of quote. Whatever cynical and derisive effects there are brought about by this pandemic, such as the loss of loved ones or loss of one's livelihood, the Filipino is able and should be able to rise above these provocative challenges. As an ordinary onlooker, I am personally interested to know how the Filipino will be reborn out of the pandemic ashes. So it is on this note that I would like to welcome you all to this year's St. Thomas More lecture entitled, "What's Different About the New Normal? Phoenix Arising from the Ashes." In view of our guest speaker's impressive credentials in dealing with various human experiences, I am very certain that all of you will derive much insight from her lecture. Allow me also to thank the Department of Sociology, headed by Dr. Clarence Batan, for connecting us to Professor Reselis and for co-organizing this wonderful and very organized event. Thank you very much again to one and all, and may you all have a pleasant day ahead of you.
Thank you, Dean Madruño. To give us the lecture context and introduce our guest speaker for today's St. Thomas More lecture, may I give you my colleagues in the Faculty of Arts and Letters from the Department of Sociology, Professor Clarence Batan, Chair of the Department, Associate Professor Carines Alejandria, and Assistant Professor Louis Benedict Ignacio.
Thank you. Thank you, Ma'am Sen. Thank you, Dean. Maraming salamat po sa lahat sa pagbibigay sa amin ng pagkakataon na magkasama-sama para sa ating St. Thomas More Lecture.
Good morning, Doc Yayet. Good morning, Ma'am Karine. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. At katulad ni Doc Yayet, ako ay nalulugod at maligaya na makasama kayo kahit virtual ngayong umaga.
Yeah. Bati muna si Doc Karine.
Good morning po to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, and alam nyo, Doc Louie and Doc Karine, isang taon na namin tong plinano dahil historic ito, dahil unang-una, the last date that was picked by Dr. Reselis was March 20, 2020. And now it's March 20, 2021. Who would have known na talagang 12 months of pandemic, and this is really crazy. But we are doing this for in celebration of St. Thomas More. So Doc Louie, nabanggit na kanina ni Ma'am Sen yung tungkol kay St. Thomas More. Ano ba masasabi mo tungkol dito?
Well, katulad nga ng nasabi ni Ma'am Zen kanina, no? Si St. Thomas More. Kasi baka yung iba nalilito, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas More. But St. Thomas More is the patron saint of statesmen and politician. Isipin mo, okay, may patron saint pala ang mga, ang mga statesmen and politician. But paano nangyari yun? Kasi nga si St. Thomas More ay, he lived during the Renaissance period. He's a humanist. Talagang siya ay maraming posisyon na ginampanan sa gobyerno at naging advisor, Lord, Chancellor siya during the time of Henry VIII. At naging kilala siya dahil siya yung tumutulong kay Henry VIII nung time na naging malaki yung paksyon ng Catholic Church at yung mga grupo na nabubuo during that time. So kahit na nasa government si St. Thomas More, siya yung tumutulong para depensahan ang gobyerno at simbahan nung panahon na yon. Kaya ikinilala din ng simbahan yung gawa na yon ni St. Thomas More.
So it is just fitting na ang ating patron saint ng Faculty of Arts and Letters ay si St. Thomas More. And I have a sense really that his teachings will be reflected in the lecture of Dr. Reselis. Alam mo, itong lecture na to ay traditionally being given by the most prominent of Filipinos, from the president to the justices to the educators. And yet, what is more important here is its relevance. Every year, the Faculty of Arts and Letters talk about relevant issues. Kaya siguro si Doc Karine ang best na makapag-explain sa atin, no? Doc Karine, 1 year of pandemic, and what can you say about it?
I guess, especially from what we had yesterday, right? Everybody got shocked. And we are bound to be experiencing more shock as days come. One question that most of us probably asking is, how do we make sense of this drastic loss? No, kasi it's not just the loss of life. There's also the loss of your capacity to move, capacity to do things that you've always done. And so the loss transcends the individual context. It has now become a loss within a societal context. It relates to a lot of our institutions. Para siyang Pandora that allowed us not just to see um, allowed us not to just see the problems within ourselves. It also allowed us to see the gaps in our institutions. So this COVID-19 pandemic has truly brought a lot of questions about our institutions, our individual aspirations, and our future. So that's the reason why I think the lecture of Professor Mary Rosales today is a good look in the mirror that could provide us with some kind of a critical gaze that can possibly help us equip ourselves on better understanding our situation right now and probably our trajectory in this very difficult time of our history.
Wow! So hindi na po namin patatagalin, nais na po namin ipakilala si Dr. Racelis, hindi the traditional short bio niya, kundi sa pagtatanong ko sa intersection ni Dr. Racelis sa buhay namin ng mga emerging and a little bit senior sociologist in the field. So, Doc Louie, can you share that beautiful intersection with Dr. Racelis as a way of introducing our guest lecturer today?
Yes, unang-una kong na-encounter ang pangalang Mary Roselis Holsteiner sa mga readings nung ako'y nag-aaral. Pero personally, una ko siyang na-encounter nung nagbigay siya ng talk sa Letran Intramuros. At pinag-usapan namin, I had a chance to personally ask her and talk with her of her thoughts about community settlements in the urban areas. Kasi yun yung field na pinag-aaralan ni Ma'am Mary, informal settlements, how communities emerge. And we've talked about how it should be more beautiful kung itatrato halimbawa yung mga informal settlers sa loob ng Intramuros na sobrang tagal na doon na hindi lang basta nuance kundi parte ng history ng Intramuros. Of course, I've also encountered many times Ma'am Mary in Ateneo as a co-teacher as well, and the exchanges has always been beautiful. And lastly, of course, Ma'am Mary is a pillar in the Philippine Sociological Society, and everyone looks up to her. Kaya ang tawag sa kanya, Mama Mary.
Yes. yes. Well, what about, and this is very interesting because I was a witness of the PhD dissertation defense of Doc Karine, where Ma'am Mary was one of the examiners. So, Doc Karine, what can you say about Ma'am Mary, our guest lecturer?
First of all, I'd like to stress that people from my field, anthropology, are also claiming Prof. Mary. So just to be clear, she's not all yours. She's also ours. So Prof. Mary is a pillar as well in anthropology, and all anthropologists like myself who are studying subaltern communities, she's like the barometer of, did we do well? Did we understand this well? Her work in Baseco compound has severely inspired my own work. And you mentioned that she was my critical reader, and I think all of the anthropologists who have gone through her mentoring, her readership, have been able to refine our own lenses, because her massive work on subaltern communities become more and more like an encyclopedic reference for most of us. And so I think her impact does not only rest on me, but it also affected most of the students I also mentored who also work in subaltern communities. So the legacy lives on.
Wow. Well, for me, 20 plus years ago, I was a very young student of sociology at the UP. That was when I first met our dear speaker. She was very important to most of us because she is not just a mentor, not like a teacher, but most especially, ewan ko, parang cheerleader parang a supporter of many sorts, no? She was the one who introduced me to youth studies. She was the one who introduced me to a lot of people who has become very influential in the way I do my sociology now. But I think the most important part is that her sociology is different. her sociology and anthropology is different. I should say that because kahit dun sa intro nakalagay, sociologist and anthropologist. I think it is different because of one thing, and that is because of social conscience. Similar to St. Thomas More, ang lakas ng social conscience na tinuturo ni Doc Mary sa lahat ng kanyang engagement. Hindi lang sa akademya, hindi lang sa NGOs, POs, pero sa kabuuan, even in the most, the biggest and exciting organizations, that's UNICEF and also the United Nations. So ladies and gentlemen, all of you fellow artlets, let us welcome a sociologist, an anthropologist, research scientist of the Institute of Philippine Culture, Ateneo de Manila University, panel of the eminent persons on United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, we're so proud to introduce to you our St. Thomas More lecturer for 2021, our very own Professor Mary Racelis.
Thank you, everyone. My goodness, Dr. Clarence, Dr. Karine, and Dr. Louis. I'm overwhelmed by your memories of our connections, and I'm very appreciative of this really extraordinary type of introduction. So thank you very much for that. Let me say also to Father Regent, to Dr. Madrunio, how privileged I feel to be the lecturer for this year. With St. Thomas More as the presence in a way for all of us. The man who said, in the end, it's conscience. My conscience tells me what I must do, even if it's against my own life. And I think this is what many of us are faced with today. So let me go on then to what I would like to present to you, and I hope we will have more time for discussion with this very distinguished panel of younger generation. I always tell that people like the three here who just spoke, you should be lucky I was your mentor, because there's always someone older than you. Even if you think you're aging, let me tell you, you're very young in my perspective. Everything is relative. So let me start with my first slide. Notice the picture. That is one picture of the phoenix. And why do I use the phoenix as my image or the simile for today's presentation? That's because, the phoenix in Greek literature was a mythical bird who, feathers and all shining, who decided to just die. He set up his own funeral pyre, got into it, it burned, died, and that's it. It's a mythical view of Greek philosophers and so on. But the distinctive part of this phoenix is he then arose from those ashes to forge a new world. And I thought that image is something very pertinent to us in the difficulties that all of us are facing with this pandemic, but the recognition that we will rise out of it. We can rise out of it into what is commonly called the new normal, or what ex-chancellor Mike Tan prefers to call the better normal. And so let's look at what is that better normal. So let me present just kind of a summary of what I hope for you to see in the coming minutes. Right, first the introduction about Phoenix. Then second, the slide reviewing our losses 1 year later, reviewing our gains 1 year later, identifying, what were the existing vulnerabilities even before the pandemic, our issues, problems, but which have been exacerbated, made worse by this pandemic. And most important, and I hope we can get to that with enough time to treat it properly, which is arising from our ashes, what are the contours of a society that is reborn? And remind you of what was already said by St. Thomas More. I die the King's faithful servant. We are all responsible to our societies, but we must never forget that in the end, we are accountable to God. God's first. And it's very appropriate today to remember St. Thomas's words in that regard. Let me just add that the advantage of having 1 year since we first thought of this talk is that what I would have said 1 year ago would be drastically different from what I want to say today because of what we have learned from this one traumatic but sometimes very exciting year. So next. When we say, and I just use the term facetiously, zooming toward the new normal, since so many of us are on Zoom like now, we're talking about, as Phoenix, arising from a catastrophe, which implies rebirth, which means transformation, and learning from our pandemic experience, right? That the deficiencies that were there before the pandemic, many of them, but that they have been exacerbated by the pandemic and now come to the fore. So we have a terrific opportunity to confront that in a new way. We have new learnings that emerged about our capacities under the circumstances and the enormous creativity that's exploded on the scene at all levels of society. Let me quote Jennifer Weiner, who said, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, the thing you think you cannot survive, it's the thing that makes you better than you used to be. So let's think about that. Next. Just review quickly. I won't go into this now because we'll talk about more of it later, but just let me run down all our collective experiences, much of which you already know. We had a sudden lockdown that spread unemployment, income losses across all sectors, especially affecting, of course, the poor. Businesses closed, there are higher food and basic goods prices, limited public transport, high cost of testing. Even if you could go back to work, you had to pay for a very expensive test. The whole nation, downturn in the economy. And now we see huge vaccine loans from the ADB and World Bank and others. Wonderful, except we better track how are those loans going? Are they going directly to what the intention was? And that's the value of citizen participation in the society's progress. Thank you. Go on. Next. So what we see in the health sector, our rates still high, lack of appropriate information for different groups of people, and still higher than what should be death rates. We have massive food insecurity, especially in the poorer communities, and that translates to sheer hunger, malnutrition, and deaths. Right? So for the lockdown, for many of the urban poor that I know best, the public health measures, while desirable, were really unrealistic in many cases. Washing hands and social distancing when you live in a small room in a structure in an informal settlement where water is difficult to get. How do you wash your hands in social distance? And yet you can be penalized if you don't. Mask people have been very good because they can create their own mask. Think about that. Next. We saw the attention to COVID, which is of course essential, did in fact marginalize attention to other illnesses that affect the population, heart, cancer, family planning services access. So women and children especially were affected because the normal public health system is very much focused on them, but because of the COVID needs, it shifted away from their everyday needs. And this has had significant implications for their own health and well-being. We're still wondering about the vaccine orders and rollout. We'll get to that later. And the health status and access of poor people, even before COVID-19, is already coming to the fore. In other words, it's not new that the health situation has a very hard time responding to help the majority population of urban poor in the city. But the pandemic has brought added threats, but at least it's raised it now to much more national attention. Very good. Thank you. Next. Something which we didn't pay much attention to before or dismissed is mental health. I think now we realize mental health is real. It's serious. It's not something to be ashamed about. It has to be recognized in its own terms, and it must be dealt with in a humane and strong humanitarian and healthy way. You have parental anxiety over the capacity to feed your family because, especially urban poor, they work on a daily basis. If you can't earn for that day, how are you going to feed your family? That led to feelings of fear, well, alienation, loneliness, isolation, fear. Even in middle and upper class families, you began to see that because people couldn't get together, right? So that generated another set of mental health problems, emotional problems, the separation, the fact that if somebody in your family or your friend died, you couldn't even talk to them beforehand, maybe by cell phone, but often not, held by a nurse. But immediate cremation, almost as soon as you discovered they died, and you can't grieve. How does it make you feel when you're not able to send your loved ones on to the next level in the ways that are proper to our society and which are spiritually sound and give us comfort? There's another whole dimension we haven't paid that much formal attention to. Violence against women and children, very clear, the evidence is there, and we go into that later. Children unable to go out and play, meet friends, the fear of police raids, especially in informal settlers, because of how they're often regarded in a negative sense and have to be policed, which undermines their own capacity to respond. And of course, the most serious in the long run is the increased number of suicides in despair. Next. Let's go into education. I think more than anybody, this group that we're discussing today, your knowledge has been weakened by online learning. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's important to continue. But of course, it's faulty, causes lots of problems. But for urban poor, what we see is that they are the problems that middle class young people who have access to equipment and so on, all the modern technology, which they don't, or they have very low level cell phones. They have a problem with the load, the internet cost. So even though they want to participate in this virtual learning, it's often undermined by their situation and lack of access to technology. Even though many local governments have actually allocated e-systems for them. Of course, it affected the parents, especially mothers, who had to become tutors, which affected their own lives, especially if they were trying to earn something. So the restrictions on going out for young people, missing your actual contacts with classmates, I don't have to tell this group about that. So increasing dropouts are of serious concern. And for women especially, the loss of their income because of the lockdowns, which makes a difference in whether you're able to feed your family, the business closures, and so on, the having to tutor their own children. Next. In terms of governance, tracking and control, quarantine facilities, which could have been improved, and again, the heavy police and military presence around these kind of communities, undermining community initiatives and self-generated care for neighbors because of the apprehensions and in local communities. Next. Again, governance, the anti-terror law, killings of activists, human rights lawyers, media personalities, of course, weaken legitimate protests and legitimate voices speaking out about their situation, being scared. SWS survey just showed that a huge proportion of Filipinos today are very reluctant to say anything negative lest they fear some kind of retaliation from government. That is not the mark really of a healthy society, an inclusive society. So information flow is essential. And we will see how vaccine management is done, and that will be part of the next set of controversies, which, I mean, in a sense, healthy in that controversy generates discussion to fix something. But if part of the population who has the problem feels it cannot speak out, you can see why we're going to have problems and be still quite far behind in Southeast Asia in how we're dealing with this COVID. Next. Let's look at connectivity. The power of the internet to expand and sustain people's networks has just exploded in a very positive sense. Zoom meetings and webinars, cell phone messenger networks, even among the urban poor, reaching now not just your neighbors or the other city people, but all across the society and even internationally. The working at home, making new sets of arrangements, you get to know your family, but then a lot of controversy also, can't go out, loss of face-to-face interaction has had taken a toll on people's sense of well-being. But you have online ordering and selling, which has boomed, and that will continue after the lockdowns. The wealth of online information that people now realize they actually can draw on, right? The corporate sector has mobilized for donations to communities. That has been much appreciated. Next. Again, community mobilizing has been generated to the extent that because they all have their cell phones, they can connect with one another, even if they're in their houses or when they're allowed to go out into their community. It has made a very big difference for communities mobilizing to address the issues that are coming in, how the SAP is being fairly distributed and so on, right? Raising funds, it enabled them to contact friends outside, relatives, others, donors from other countries to help them survive from one day to the next. Very important. I already said, monitoring fair distribution of goods. One of the things, appreciating youth and young adults as experts in the use of social media for communicating information and action. When a mother who is now not making any more uniforms because nobody wants to buy uniforms, but now making masks, asked her 12-year-old son, how do I get this online so that people can buy from me? And maybe he and she, their siblings who are 17, 16, work it out for this mother. Wow, my children know an amazing body of knowledge, which is important to us as a family. So the higher regard there. And then the pandemic did enhance NGO faith-based groups, the church, media, academic support to recognize that we have to act together with disadvantaged people. Right? Next. We learn new skills. We had, as we said, ordering, delivery, online selling, connecting directly with rural producers and a lot of NGO groups in economic spheres help mobilize that so that that connection could be made. The whole notion of self-reliance becoming important, that people have to do things, especially because you're never sure when assistance is going to come, either from the government or the private sector. If it comes, wonderful, but you cannot rely on it. So you have to do something on your own, sariling sikap. Next. Environment, we've seen lower smoke, pollution levels going down, bicycle use because people had to get there without the other forms of transportation. So demand now for bicycle lanes, you see that generates a new set of responsibilities from government. Flora and fauna flourished, but tourism declined, which was very serious for many of the communities, rural and urban, that rely on tourism for earning. Next. Let's talk about the vulnerabilities that have come out because of the pandemic. The daily, again, this is sort of review, but bringing out some things maybe I've already said. Daily wage earners devastated by the sudden lockdowns, they usually have meager savings. Some have community-based savings if they're together. But again, tremendous problems. How do you craft your future? Paraan, how do you do that? If you're not sure, you can't depend anymore on the standard things that enabled you to survive before. So increased dependence on others, especially the government's sporadic, insufficient and unpredictable responses, but they say largely it's the national. But it's that the national took a long time because of course you have to mobilize for 100 million plus people, whereas the local governments came out as much more, responding much more quickly. And because their voters, those who will put them there, are right there in front of them. So they are more accountable, feel more accountable, and the demands from the population become much stronger on them. And this is why local government, we have to look again. That maybe is where we need to go in terms of strengthening nationwide responses. But you still have the harassment of, say, sidewalk vendors, most of whom are women, destruction of their carts, their products, because they were, quote, violating the law going out. But for them, it was a question of survival. For them, what really upset them most was not only being caught, but their carts destroyed or their tables destroyed and what they were selling confiscated. They said, what does this government want us to do? Become magnanakaw? What else how else are we supposed to survive? So rules have to look into what's the situation of those who will be affected by them. One size cannot fit all, and it doesn't fit all. That's why the value of listening to voices of those in different types of communities that need to be heard about their particular situations and how government and the private sector and civil society can best respond. You still had, because of the build, high infrastructure emphasis, which maybe before the pandemic could be justified, now there has to be another look at, can some of those be re-examined in light of shifting the money for them instead to community-based advantages? Next. Because this is the informal economy, right? And informal settlements are the best expressions of the informal economy. Crowded spaces, we've already talked about that, the entire family in small rooms, banned public transport, the requirement to stay at home, being women especially affected by that, excessive police military surveillance. Next. That's the life of people in informal settlements. Next. But they were, getting on the internet, but lots of problems, we said, with load. Same thing, violence against women and children has increased tremendously because of being kept in a household where the father, if he's there, is so frustrated because he can't do what he's supposed to be doing, which is earning for the family, in addition to his wife also, or partner, and his children. And so taking out his frustrations on his wife partner or on his children, that has definitely increased. So has incest, the reporting, and you have early teenage pregnancies, 10 to 14 years old, are increasing. Could that be because that's largely from rape or incest, not so much boyfriend, girlfriend, as would be the case for the 15 to 17-year-olds. So let's take a look at that. That has been a significant impact. Extrajudicial killings continue, but they're not so publicized. One, because been there, done that. We've heard that same old, same old, same old. So less reporting, but it's happening according to our informants. And this is something we should be concerned about, the rule of law. Next. External support groups became very significant for informal settler communities and poor communities, disadvantaged groups. That's NGOs, faith-based groups, private, and so on. So initially, though, all of these entities did great jobs coming in, but you begin to get what's called donor fatigue because they can't keep doing it. They say eventually, we're doing this until government gets its act together. And as local governments did, and barangay governments did respond, the fact of the national having lots of problems because of the huge population that they had to address, then the private sector came in, but up to a point. So that's when communities decided, we have to tend to it ourselves. We cannot rely on the generosity and humanitarian concerns from the outside. Okay, let's go on to the next. Civil society, we've seen their responses. One of their roles, traditionally everywhere in the world, is to critique government responses or the private sector power relations part and call for accountability. And because they're usually on the ground and they know how they have access to resources, education, more than the average poorer communities, they can speak not for the communities, but to bring out the voices of what's happening in those communities to those in policy and powerful funded government and private sector to know how they can better respond. Well, let's continue. Self-help, sariling sikap, then has become the norm. It always was for poor communities, but even more now because of the feeling you cannot wait in this emergency situation. You cannot wait for all of the external forces that might want to help. You have to do something on your own, right? You have to show your children that you don't just sit down, do nothing, even though those who committed suicide, in effect, have done that. Right? Next. So what are we saying? Contours of society reborn, the phoenix arising from the ashes. What is this Filipino phoenix to look at? These again are broad strokes. So we have to get to specifics. And that's why planning at community level, local government level becomes crucial, because the variety and mix of circumstances differs from one area to the other. They have to come to terms with it. The local government has to come to terms with it. And from that collective awareness should come national government policy in support of different types of issues that it needs to be respond to flexibly through Congress, through being the government of the national country, right? So my economist dean of Ateneo wrote an article some years ago, or he's been writing about the solidarity economy. He and a number of economists who are very concerned about the social implications also of economics. And their perspective is that the economy has to put people and planet front and center in a globalized market. The market is there. They're not overthrowing the market or downplaying it. I mean, the market is a reality, but how can you make the market globally and nationally reorient itself to put people and planet, the environment first, right? So economy cannot be just blind growth and profit maximization as its value set, as its criteria of success. It has to be more than that. And that's what solidarity economy is looking at, formulating a societal framework whose economic practices align with values like solidarity, participatory democracy, equity in class, ethnicity, gender, and age. Actually, the National Economic Development Authority has its plan with Filipino values as its core. But let's assess that, and let's evaluate that plan in relation to what is actually happening. And that's where academics, universities play a significant role. What's the evidence? What is the evidence to show this or that? That's our role. And to raise it, especially if it's a social issue and the conscience of St. Thomas More comes to the fore. Right? Next. So what does it mean? Inclusiveness, sustainability, pluralism, diversity. These are important values. Highlight the goals of everyone living well in harmony with nature and with one another. As St. Thomas More again says in his Utopia, quote, "Nobody owns anything, but everyone is rich. For what greater wealth can there be than cheerfulness, peace of mind, and freedom from anxiety?" He said that in the 16th century. It still applies in the 21st. Right? Next. There is a new kind of economic perspective coming on the scene. And I most recently read about it, an article by Darren Sharp on sharing cities, new urban imaginaries for diverse economies, coming out of a new awareness of what must societies be like. And he says, let me just summarize, a global urban socioeconomic movement that's a transformational sharing economy features the market with peer-to-peer non-market exchanges reinforced by local government support. In other words, it's not the market only that dominates, but the non-market exchanges, that's the social, cultural, environmental, reinforced by especially local government it's on the scene, but of course national also. That you look at the entire city as a commons belonging to everybody, activated by civil society, local government, and the market in horizontal relationships, not this top-down kinds of things, but horizontal co-production in the economy and co-governance relationships. That's what we mean by participatory governance, good governance, right? That the shift of power in power relations has to come about that builds social capital, which is people as resources and what they know and what they do, and community resilience via cooperation and strengthening of the commons now through digital platforms. I mean, this is a tremendous new resource. And how can the digital platform be used or reformulated to be of greater service to the majority population that is still quite marginalized. So this transformational sharing economy is grounded in the proven grassroots evidence of innovation and civil society partnerships with municipality support that work and create a shared infrastructure and services that generate social justice, economic democracy, and ecological sustainability. You don't separate the market from the society's everyday lives, and nor from how local government can assist in bringing out the tremendous creativity and energy and motivation of people if they're given the chance, right? So this is different from what is called the transactional sharing economy, which is what's coming out now. What is the transactional? That it's still based on the market, but it's very profit oriented still. In other words, yes, it's generated this pandemic jobs for all of those who deliver goods and motorcycles, but do they? I mean, huge numbers now do that, big plus. But what are the labor relations there? Do they can't form a labor union, obviously, or they don't. Are they do they get their fair share of payment by doing this quite grueling kinds of work, right? So we have to look at that, new kinds of dysfunctions that are emerging to continue the notion of inequality, where the income disparities, that the top 20% is getting more and more share of the resource of society, while the bottom 20 to 40 to 50% are getting worse off, and maybe the middle is trying to struggle somewhere in between. So we have to look at the whole image of what's happening to society in economic terms, but in a framework which is more transformational, right? Not transactional, which is the way it's currently appearing. We have to change from transactional to transformational sharing. Next. So there are specific economic reforms that can be taken, reallocate the budgets more to the poorer half of society, social services, and so on. Re-examine these infrastructure projects together with government for real allocation to socially responsive infrastructure, mass transit, health centers distributed throughout the country, small hospitals, not so much concentrated in Metro Manila again, safe water and sanitation everywhere, renewable energy, all of that has to come into the picture now. Heighten local government efforts responsive to community-driven participatory initiatives and people's plans. When they're organized, they often have a plan, and they want to present it to government as something that they can work out. And there's a negotiation process of what's possible. But, when governments have been responsive, and we have cases of that in many cities and municipalities throughout this country, but they're sporadic. And we have to know more about that and make it systemic across the whole country as a building people process. Right, next. Well, maintain price stability, very important for poor people especially. Support small, medium enterprises, promote family farming as opposed to large corporate farming as the way to go, because while that may be significant, family farming worldwide has been shown to be the most profitable and the most socially and economically sustainable, right? Examine, reorganize government policies that may have been crafted with good intention, but they don't fit large parts of the population because they came out of the formal economy rules, which don't work when it comes to informal economies. So let's see if we can get that together. And that's the role of NGO civil society groups and academics, is how to bring these together, enable the disadvantaged, marginalized groups to move into the society. They really don't want to overthrow the society for the most part. They want to get into the society, into the formal economy, so that they have some kind of future for them, their children in particular. Next. Political reform means decentralization, much more seriously to local government, but ensuring that in the local government sector, accountability and safeguard mechanisms are established, which are community monitoring based in part, right? To outlaw what Professor Mendoza also calls the fat political dynasties. He's not against dynasties if they're thin. In other words, you were a mayor but now your daughter's going to run for Congress, or you run for Congress, but no other family member takes a position, as opposed to fat political dynasties, which he says, where in one family, in a certain, say, a typical one province, the mayor is the wife, the congressman is the son, and the husband is the governor. I mean, I'm not referring to any particular one, but you're saying when they see that kind of combination, that simultaneously a family is controlling all the significant positions, poverty is directly related. There is a correlation, and we have to look at that evidence. So outlaw, we've been talking about that for years in Congress. Let's get serious. Attack bureaucratic red tape and corruption, again, perennial process, but let's really focus on ways of doing that. Reform the unjust land laws, rebuild trust in government, which has seriously deteriorated, and get back into more democratic electoral processes and the rule of law. Next. On social, cultural, and environmental reform, again, community-based approaches, reinforce women's leadership, because we see it in our urban poor communities. Women are the strong leaders for good reason, because they learn that from childhood, how you nurture the people around you. All right, and they multitask, they know how to negotiate without making power people angry and so on, right? And that's kind of their role. They do well. You've seen it internationally, with the heads of state who are women, have been able to manage this pandemic far better than many countries. Now, we're not disparaging the men, please. We need the men to see where women's talents can be brought out more in a collaborative way. Then recognize young people's capacity to handle the social media and design systems that connect the resources and institutions to benefit people in their everyday lives. So chatting with your friends is important, especially now, but please, young people, figure out ways in which you can connect your talent and knowledge on social media and how it operates with people's lives and how these can improve. Be spokespersons with them, right? Together with them. Next. So we have to get ready for new blended arrangements that combine person-to-person interaction at work and school with internet-related work and study at home. This is a whole new dimension. We learned a lot now, but now when we go back to normal, quote unquote, or the better normal, how is that going to be? Because the social media part for learning is very significant, will remain with us. But how to make that a democratic system, controlling fake news and trolls and all of those problems. Prioritize social protection schemes for the most vulnerable. Government has been doing that. We need to speed that up and reorient the budgets to make it work. Respect the indigenous knowledge, which is present in basic sector population. And that doesn't mean only indigenous people, even though we refer to them too. They have a lot of knowledge about their own cultures that could be brought to the fore if anybody would listen to how they managed to work and survive for centuries to protect their environment, as they still do. But the same is true for urban poor, rural poor, and anybody, migrants. They have their own knowledge, which should not be dismissed because those who are technologically better educated think they know better, but really should be brought into the discussion. Next. And in addition to strengthening marginalized communities, also enable them to see how their local government initiatives do connect with the national, because that's important. They are citizens, not only of their communities, but of the Philippines, really of the world. So, where do they fit into this? Enable them to think through, to discuss, to work out where they fit, but focusing on the local as it relates to national and international. And we've said, all right, priorities to people's concerns, needs. Next. We're getting to the end. So understand the rationale for informal settler poor people's behavior, whether rural or urban or wherever, responding to the multiple challenges which are posed by formal economy rules that often don't fit them. Only when their total well-being is assured and their whole informal economy situations can be reformed to enable them to get into the formal economy or develop an informal economy, which you don't make a distinction anymore. What's formal and informal? It's people working together to achieve their own family goals as well as community and collective goals. So only when their total well-being is assured can they make the kinds of decisions needed in a unified society. Let me just quote a writer who is a British writer of Japanese extraction, clearly, Haruki Murakami. He uses in one of his writings the storm, but the storm for us is the pandemic, all right, or the fire of the phoenix. He says, once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what this storm is all about. Think about that in relation to yourself and where you are in your society. Next. And finally, let us therefore, closing remarks, let us therefore all demand transformation. Let us all do our share to create a brave new post-pandemic world that is sharing, inclusive, democratic, and socially just, that regards all people with respect and dignity. When we talk to urban poor communities, they're anxious or upset about something done to them by somebody from the outside, they say, dignidad man lang. They can't even treat us as if we're human beings with dignity. So that's very important. Respeto man lang, right? Okay, and that is firm, in a society that is firmly committed to the observance of human rights as people understand their rights at local level, facing their everyday round, and the rule of law. So that is the lesson our Filipino Phoenix, emerging out of the COVID-19 fire that threatened to destroy us. That's the image that's flashing as we zoom forward in the direction of our glorious rebirth into the better normal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Mary Racelis, for that very comprehensive and still comprehensive, and it's very lightening for us to hear all of these aspects of during the pandemic and what we can do and expect in the better normal. Again, thank you, Ma'am Mary. But before we proceed to the next parts, particularly the open forum and discussion, we'll allow Ma'am Mary to have a glass of water first. And while for us, we will be entertained for a while with a very short presentation from a select number of sociology students. While we're at it, we encourage everyone to post questions, comments in our Facebook chat box or comment box so that we can read it and address it to Ma'am Mary after the presentation. But while you're doing that, again, ladies and gentlemen, a very short, creative presentation from select sociology students.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system. 480909889 is not available. At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hi! Musta ka na? Ako? Eto, di mapakali. Ang hirap mag-aral. Minsan, nawawalan ng net. Minsan, di maintindihan yung lecture. Madalas, nawawalan ng gana. Tapos, pag-on mo ng TV. Nga, makikita mo na habang ikaw, ginugugol mo lahat ng oras mo sa pag-aaral. Yung iba, andun, Ginugugol nila oras nila para mabuhay. Para may salba ang sarili. Di mo talaga maiwasang mag-isip. Bakit ganito? Para saan pa ba tayo natututo? Para kanino? Ang hirap eh. Ang hirap isipin na habang nag-aaral ka, kapwa Pilipino'y lumalaban sa labas ng walang armas. Na habang nasa loob ka ng iyong tahanan yung iba, wala nang mabalikan. May saysay pa ba ang lahat? Sana nga. Sana totoo nga na tayo ang pag-asa ng bayan. Sana sa ating pagdibdib ng galit sa mga nangyayari, sana di yun mabaliwala. Sana gamitin yung pampagana para lumaban pa. Sana hindi ito maging isa pang sana. Ito siguro yung part na magsasabi ako ng napaka-inspiring na ending message. Yung nakakakilabot. Pero sa totoo lang, di na natin kailangan yun. Ang kailangan natin kumilos. Kahit na mahirap. Kahit na hindi agad-agad. Makakabangon tayo muli. Ingat ka dyan ha. Nasa labas ang laban.
Tulad ng isang ibon, tao ay lumilipad. Pangarap ang tanging nais na marating at matupad.
Good afternoon. Yes, we're back. Thank you for that beautiful sharing ng mga sociology students. Doc Louie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Doc. Yeah.
Yes, so pasensya na nagkaroon tayo ng konting glitch, no? And Doc Karine? Doc Karine, are you there?
I'm here.
Yes. Wow, what a wonderful analysis of our 12-month life, meaning I am seeing a lot of responses, no, nag-start na magtanong ang marami nating mga kasama, and really well, as a youth sociologist, ang talagang malaking tinitingnan ko dito is yung impact ng pandemya sa mga bata at mga kabataan, at this means na palagi akong tinitingnan ko kung ano na yung kalidad ng edukasyon natin at ano na yung kalidad ng kahirapan at edukasyon ng mga hindi nakakapag-aral, right? Oo. What I love about Dr. Mary's input is that it's seeing the world not just in one perspective, kasi hindi ka naman Nahihirapan ngayon dahil lang sa may sakit ka. Nahihirapan ka dahil may istruktura tayo na nagsasabi at nagbibigay ng mga polisiya. Ngayon, kung polisiya ay tama o mali sa iba't ibang karanasan at sa iba't ibang mga inequality na nararamdaman natin, medyo yung naguguluhan ako nung una, ngayon nagkakaroon ako ng parang framing kung paano titingnan ang issue. Ikaw, Ma'am Karine, para sa iyo, ano yung initial impact ng ating sharing ng lecture ni Dr. Racelis?
Napaka-powerful nung points na ni-raise ni Professor Racelis on the inclusivity of our approach to addressing the pandemic. Because most of the time, medyo hyper orientation natin on the economic side, and here we're seeing that from the statements of Professor Rosell is that this is more than the biological, this is more than the economic. There is health that even goes to the mental health. There are lifelong impacts of this pandemic, not just to our generation. It's an intergenerational impact on the society.
Wow, oo. Doc Louie, ikaw sa iyong field sa urban studies and sa politics, medyo may magagandang sinasabi si wisdom, nuggets of wisdom si Dr. Racelis. Anong unang take mo sa kanyang sharing?
Yeah, unang-una gusto ko yung naging approach ni Professor Racelis that it covers practically the entire scope horizontally and vertically, di ba? Vertically from national government to local government to even communities, and horizontally, katulad ng nasabi ni Doc Karine, from different aspects, whether it's economics, politics, health, mental health. Ganun kalawak yung naging discussion, which is fitting kasi yung nararanasan natin ngayon ay naapektuhan yung ganung kalawak ng aspeto ng buhay natin. And with your question, I like how Professor Racelis pointed out participatory governance and participatory democracy as a way to transform how we do things. Diba? Katulad nga nung keynote niya na definitely we should be, and we will be different people when we get out of this storm, this pandemic, because we should see the governance aspect of our daily lives differently. After this pandemic. So gusto ko yung ganong perspektibo on participatory democracy leading towards transformation. Napakaganda no?
Parang ramdam na ramdam natin na ang talagang gobyerno ay hindi gobyerno lang ng mga nasa posisyon. Ang tunay na gobyerno ay yung kasama yung mga tao. So parang wow, sabi ko, I'm reminded of the many wisdom social science insights na talagang tinuturo. Kaya nga siguro magandang i-point out sa lahat ng nanonood na mga 259 at as of now. Kanina naging 270 na tayo. But this is what is beautiful here is that you could still view this after this. And for those who are teaching social sciences and those who are teaching Araling Panlipunan, napakaganda ng lecture, and the more that you're going to listen to it, the more that you're going to have materials for reflection for your students. And I encourage you to share this to many. Kaya nga siguro this is best that we invite again Dr. Mary Racelis dito sa ating panel discussion for her to answer some of the questions na pinopost na po ng ating mga kasama sa ating FB live streaming. Dr. Racelis, welcome back.
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, I look forward now to hearing others.
Yes. Siguro, uunahin ko na yung tinek sa akin ng isang kasamaan po natin dito, si Dr. Franz Cortez ng Department of Philosophy. Sabi niya po sa akin, it's a beautiful concept, yung transformational sharing economy. As a concept, yung transformational sharing economy. But he would like to know, will the present dominant political setup in our country support this? How can we really actualize it in a seemingly desensitized and highly politicized political arrangement? So it seems, Ma'am Mary, talagang reflective to ng nangyayari sa atin ngayon sa uri ng gobyerno na meron tayo. So what is your response po, Ma'am?
Yeah, well, I think really a challenge, but also an opportunity is we have an election coming up. And, this government also recognizes that it has to foster an election of the population. So maybe that's where you have to start. I mean, election is not the only thing, but you start there because it's an enormous opportunity. But as I said, you have to get kind of to the grassroots groups, right, for that. But the middle class also becomes important, or middle semi-upper class, because those are in revolution. I'm not talking about revolutions, but in social change or transformational worldwide, historically, it's largely been those in the middle who find, they're the more comfortable ones, but finally are pushed to take action, either because they're personally affected or in principle, like St. Thomas More, their conscience won't allow them not to do anything, right? So, and usually because they have contacts with those who are really experiencing difficulties, that they begin to realize this isn't just something theoretical. Real people are suffering. And that's why I'm really a strong supporter of, civil society as a group that brings together the corporate sector, even government, to talk to communities. Because it's when you know people personally. I just one fast example. I was involved with the Department of Public Works and Highways in a project run as by them, and supported by the ADB, I think, where the USEC, who was a woman engineer, said, "Could you help our engineers understand why is it that informal settlers are always fighting them when they want to give them better relocation sites, right? What's the matter with them?" So we had a workshop, seminar, interesting, but the main thing is we organized those 60 people, 10 by 10, over different time to go to communities that we knew who had people's plans, who had, fought relocation. And we said, just talk to them. The rule is in the morning, all day. In the morning, you don't say anything other than, hello, listen. We want to listen to you. Why is that? And ask questions, but listen to them. Don't contradict yet. In the afternoon, they will show you their community, and you can then say, I have this problem, the government, we have to do, etc. See where, is there a way you can get together? Anyway, all right, so we have those 60 experience. When they came back the next day, the first reaction was, they're really also people, they're just like us pala, right? They don't want anything different. Like me, it's like my family. I want a better life for my children. If I'm 40 kilometers outside with no job, can't get back to the city, it's too expensive. My family breaks up. Of course, I have to live in an informal settler because it's right there where the resources are. And so just that, they saw it themselves, but I could have told them that in a lecture for 3 weeks. It wouldn't have the same impact as when they actually went to the communities and where people in their own setting tell them, this is how we live. These are our joys. Right? It's not all failures and so on. This is what we like. This is why, even though the miserable circumstances of sanitation, etc., is really awful, but we have each other. We rely on one another. We love this community. We will not move. That's why we don't want to go. We value one another because we help one another. That's how we've survived. That's the kind of thing. So connecting is very important.
Wow, napakadami na pong mga questions, and I guess Ma'am Karine, can you read one of the questions na medyo talagang very engaging po itong ating FB Live. No? I'm so fascinated with my colleagues. No? Thank you so much, really. Yes, Ma'am Karine?
So there's a question po from Sir Ramon Christian Placido. He is asking, how can we manage the health of those who are living in the rural areas during COVID?
Can you speak louder? How can we manage what?
How can we manage the health of those who are living in the rural areas during COVID?
Yeah. Rural, I've really kind of ignored, mainly because I don't do much research there. Although recently I was part of a webinar with family farm groups, which is why I realized that this is really an important way to go. I think, what mayors of municipalities that have larger rural areas, see, this is one of the things we don't think, we always think of cities, and then even small and medium-sized cities, they're cities, and there are those rural people out there. but the focus is often not on the rural, even though they are actually, these are barangays which are out in the mountains or outside there, and they seem to get less involvement. So I think local governments really, DILG has an important role to play, but so do academics. Every part of this country, we have universities. We have the state colleges and universities, which are there. You have private universities. All of them are now in the new system of the of the government, are being judged by how much research they're doing, right? And many times before, the smaller colleges out there, they don't do much, they don't have much money, and so on. But now those universities are being judged in, recordings, by rankings internationally by how much research they're doing. They are the ones. But they don't connect. Academics have, by and large, they do field research if they're an anthro or sociology, but they don't really connect much. I remember an economist saying, when I said, well, why don't you go to the field? And he said, field? Economists don't do field work. And then he said, come on, Mary, you're always criticizing us. He said, we do our share. I mean, we often walk to the Census Bureau all the time. I go to the Census Bureau. So we do field work. Yeah, I mean that's laughable. No, it was said as a joke. But I think that's, to me, the connection also between universities to provide evidence which is co-produced, with communities. If communities face certain things, so does the local government. Let them formulate the problem, and then let academics, be there as part of that process, but help frame it, because that's what we do, into studies which the people participate in, but which we write, and because we have credibility, we will, try to be not necessarily neutral, because we favor a certain, the right of people to access, but where the evidence is solid evidence. Now that's, I think, where there's a new possibility for academics to be involved, especially outside Manila. Manila, we're already there, sort of, even though, but outside, that has to be redone and strengthened.
Yeah. Doc Louis?
Yeah, thank you, Ma'am Mary. And I think with the first and the second question, the theme still revolves around participation and connection. And taking it off from the last response of Ma'am Mary on academics and the role of academics, this question is from Sir KP, also from the Department of Sociology and UST's Simbahayan. Sir KP said, maraming salamat po, Dr. Roselis. And his question is, principles and social conscience are vital in the pursuit of human rights, social justice, inclusivity, and social development. What is your suggestion or advice on how to make or strengthen academic disciplines, the academic community, and its members to locate and level up its social conscience?
Wonderful question. Thank you for that. It fits right into a whole new dimension, not new, but something I have been promoting for a long time with many others, and that's multidisciplinarity. That goes beyond interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinary means you collaborate with other disciplines to work on a common problem, right? But multidisciplinary means not only your different departments, but also with and on the ground people, whether it's local government and communities. So it's now multidisciplinary, in which we now frame this in, as you know, in sociology and anthropology, as knowledge management through co-production with the people who have the problem, who are facing the issues. So co-production, co-implementation, and co-benefits, right? So the benefits have to come to the community that needs it, as well as to academics who are doing research, so we can publish, because we need to do that. Our credibility has to be reinforced also, but based on genuine knowledge coming out in a partnership mode. So it means really, at least in universities, more interdisciplinary. And when you don't focus on your discipline's interests as such, but you look at a common problem, let's say the delivery of, let's say vaccines, right? That's going to be a big issue. And it'll be different depending on many, many factors. How about the local universities, especially local, but not necessarily only? Work with communities to see how that's happening, begin to record it, and teach them how you document that, give them the system for documentation. And then at some point, you write it up, the evidence is there, but you give it back to the community also, because they need to know it's their data, right? It's co-owned, but then you can use it to bring into the policy dimension. What I've found is that the so-called civil society sector efforts are really not in the academic literature. I just went to the PSR, Philippines, and so on, to look at what have academics who've written there said about what NGOs do, civil society, as the intermediaries. Almost nothing. Why? Because they feel they don't need academics. They're irrelevant in the past. Now they know they need them. But they have newsletters, they write their own reports, they report to the donors. But this so-called gray literature is not found in the academic. Why? Because we don't connect. And that's why I think it's really crucial. Make an effort to connect in a service mode with and for.
Yeah, Doc Mary, thank you so much for this response. Pero I want to ask this, one of the first questions asked sa ating FB from Blanche Lagrizola. Okay? Ito po, I think this is in the heart of our topic now, no? And a bit controversial, Doc Mary. What is the image of better normal for you? Open economy and getting back to face-to-face classes, or making the most of our new normal of today? When will this better normal emerge? From your perspective, is it anytime soon? Sige po.
Well, yes, we're all saying, what is this better normal, I think not to look at it as a certain point of time. It's not. It's a process, and it's going to, come and go. It will change. It reforms into a new kind of arrangement. So we have to see it as a dynamic process, not so much as an end point or some point at which we say, after, like a before and after. It's really not a before and after, because it's a continuing process, has so many elements that are connected with it, governance, health, etc., that you just have to look at it, in a dynamic interaction way and assess that for how it's going to emerge. And that's where you make an input. But I would say, the norms we're saying is what this transformational economy is now promoting. A market that recognizes of co-production, that the economy is co-produced not only by the big companies, which do have employees on the local level, but there are other mechanisms, whether it's small and medium enterprises or cooperatives, or anyway, drawing on the strengths of how people feel they can go and supporting them in that way. So this transformational, we need to understand that better. I think we're just working it out. So there's no answer. The answers are happening every day as we go, and they change. And that's why evidence, what's happening from social scientists especially, to feed people like the government, political scientists, philosophers. We need the philosophers, definitely, because if provides the reinforcing framework for values. And theologians too.
Yeah, we will have the two last questions, no, to ask, no. So we will have one from Ma'am Karine and one from Doc Louie, right? Doc Karine.
There's a question from Dr. Miles Areviliaga. She's asking, as educators, how can we reconcile mental health concerns of the students and authentic assessment of virtual learning outcomes?
Yeah, we're those who are in the fact, we're all faced with this, Well, I think what I've learned, and certainly my co-faculty have learned, not only Ateneo but also UP, I teach there, as well as yourselves, all of us in the teaching enterprise, is you can't use the same norms as before. You want, of course, excellence, right? But now you recognize excellence doesn't only come from from certain, standard approaches, but the mental state or emotional, not emotional perspective and actual situation of the young people. I mean, when I had a student who said, I want to join the synchronous, but my house is very small and I have 4 brothers and sisters and I cannot throw them out of the room. So how do I study? How do I participate in this? So then you have to figure out, okay, how can we do that? And we're all trying to do that. So what that shows is you have to get some idea of, what's the situation, and have compassion. I mean, that's number one. I think at this day and age, you say compassion. Before, we never used to think of compassion as a dominant thing because, you want excellence and, responsible studying. And it's true, some may take advantage of the compassion, but you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the majority to whom you have to address are really faced with these things. So I think being compassionate, not necessarily being demanding, but explaining this is what you need. And how about this is kind of the basic minimum. But okay, you just got COVID. Of course you can be late with your exam, your paper. 2 weeks from now, if you think you've recovered, even 3, it's okay. All right, and that kind of thing. I think that's a very important thing that now universities, faculty have to recognize that we're a community and we can't just leave it to parents and students and neighbors to deal with it. We are part of that community and we have to understand it and be as strong as possible, but recognizing, enabling them to know we want you to graduate, right? And to graduate, we must ascertain that you have achieved a certain level of understanding. We are very flexible, but it's your responsibility also. You want to be a good professional in society that cares. So it's you who has to establish your own inner moral convictions, conscience, that will lead you on. So having faith in the other person, I believe that so strongly, but also because I saw how it was so undermined in communities that I knew are very active, but who then stopped or got so fearful because they were always being penalized by police and others not to do what they thought was, their way of caring for their neighbors, right? So that compassion becomes important, but always modulated by the circumstances and the participation of the students. I often ask my students, okay, how do we deal with this, right? 12 of you can get online, but 3 of you cannot. All right, how do we as a group deal with that? And they have great examples because they know the social media, especially far better than I. So when I say, you have to help me, I don't know this world, you have to tell me. And it makes a huge difference in collective problem solving.
Wow. Doc Louis?
Thank you, Ma'am Mary. And I think this last question is a fitting question for us to continuously discuss this phenomena. So this comes from Nicolo Vitug, and he says, Dr. Rosales, thank you for a very comprehensive picture of how the situation is or situations are. But his question is there a way this can be synthesized for the Filipino individual? I am aware that there must be many ways of identification mediated by class and other structures. But is there a way we can condense for the sake of practical day-to-day living? And I guess the idea is for us discussing today, how do we extend the discourse outside of this group? How do we continuously talk about these things and engage more people so that it will be more of us thinking of solutions and acting on this problem? Mary?
Yeah, that's again very pertinent question, or observation, and I will go back to something you really know already, which is your strengths are in the social media. I mean, there are many ways of doing it. As our questioner points out, yes, there are other structures and so on, but what about individually? Okay, let me look at individual. If you're a young person, you probably at the moment spend a lot of your time on your cell phone, right? And with your friends and so on. And I'm sure many of you are already on kind of networks of that interest you for some reason. It could be, anything of the latest songs, but which is not bad. But why not, if why not get into a kind of social issue discussion? What are the things that are that in your community? What do you think we can do? Ask yourselves one another, and say, okay, maybe just do one thing every day that makes a difference for somebody else, if not in your family, somebody that you can talk to online, a friend who is going through lots of problems, but you really spend the time listening because that's really what they want you to do. And individuals can do a lot, but you have to assess, for yourselves, but you have to think outside of yourself. That's the thing. You are individually based, but you have to think outside to others, right? How can my knowledge, where I am in the world at this particular moment, how can I make even a tiny bit of difference, hopefully more if it escalates, because you have larger groups who begin to take this on. This is what, social change starts with a small groups. I'm sorry, I have to quote my favorite anthropologist, Margaret Mead, and I have her on my wall. It says, Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Right?
Wow.
There you are.
So beautiful. Well, Ma'am Mary, I do not know how to end this beautiful panel discussion that we had. This is reminiscent of the many of those intersections we had whenever we have a seminar, a forum, or a conference. So in ending, I would like to ask Doc Karine. Doc Karine, if there is one thing that you will take away from this lecture, what would it be?
That there is a need for a stronger collaboration between the academe, the CSOs, and the LGU so that we could get past this pandemic.
Beautiful. Yeah. Doc Louie?
One word, connection. In all levels, really. It's the connection that we build and that we need so that we can collectively act on this pandemic. Thank you, Mary.
Wow. As for me, the big thing for me is really social conscience. And this is the spirit of St. Thomas More, which I think is, inspired by the lecture of Dr. Mary Racelis. Thank you again for reminding us that if there's one thing that social sciences do to the students and to those who study them, it's really having that social conscience, okay? Our continuous engagement with our society. So we would like to thank you, Ma'am Mary. So thank you so much for this beautiful lecture. And so I would have to turn this over to our main moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the lecture and the sharing. But now let's proceed with the closing ceremonies. We will have with us Assistant Professor Maria Senia Rodriguez, our faculty secretary. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Batan. At this point, we would like to request the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, Professor Marilu Madrunio, and Father Rodel Aligan OP, Regent of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, to confer to our honorable guests the plaque of appreciation in recognition of her contribution to the historic St. Thomas More Lecture. The plaque of appreciation reads, the Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas, Faculty of Arts and Letters, presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Professor Mary Racelis as a resource speaker in the St. Thomas More Lecture, What's Different About the New Normal? Phoenix Arising from the Ashes, held on the 20th of March, 2021 from 10 to 12 noon via Zoom cloud meeting. Signed by Professor Marilu Madrunio, PhD, Dean, and Father Rodel E. Aligan, OP, SHD, Regent of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, underscoring the relevance of the memorial lecture for St. Thomas More.
I hope I can say thank you at some point.
We would like to hear some word of thanks from Professor Racelis, please.
Yes, thank you. Let me thank everybody who participated in this. Of course, especially our Dr. Batan, si Karine Alejandria, and Louis Ignacio, but all of you, the dean, the whole structure of the UST, but especially for those who joined us and listened and asked questions. We're all in this together, and move. Let's zoom with the new Phoenix. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. At this point, we would like to call on our Regent of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, Reverend Father Rodel Aligan OP, for his closing remarks.
Okay, so still good morning. The Dean and our speaker, Professor Mary Racelis. The World Health Organization says that this pandemic is seasonal. In other words, it will not end. If that is so, then the new normal is not really the new normal we expect, meaning to say, the old normal. So never again, perhaps, can we go back to 2018, 2019. As Professor Racelis would say, therefore, the new normal, if we would call it the new normal, is not an end point. Rather, it is a process. Therefore, the new normal should be a change of paradigm or attitudes. And that is the practice, perhaps, of the ethical virtues of faith, hope, and love. And a broader concept of what we call freedom. The phoenix in this pandemic should turn into a living spirit of love, of care, of social conscience, of participatory democracy, and of course, transformational economics. So we thank Professor Racelis for her inspirational insights from the sociological, anthropological, and even psychological point of view. But personally, that is not the overall picture of the pandemic. We have to see through the overall picture of the pandemic. In the encyclical Fides et Ratio, in any situation, we have to look at it with the eyes of reason. We should analyze, we should evaluate the situations. But on the other hand, we have to look at it in the eyes also of faith. Meaning to say that in history, God always acts. And therefore, here comes St. Thomas More, apolitical, unaligned, unbiased, but purely always implementing and practicing God's first in everything. So we thank our lecturer. She has given a very good lecture. And may we always put this in mind, that everything that has been said can really be actualized and can be transformed. So to all of you, good morning and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Aligan. The Faculty of Arts and Letters has committed to preserving the legacy of St. Thomas More, a Renaissance man keen on new ideas and thinking. He had a good grasp of his time's social problem, and his works challenge us to grow beyond ourselves and serve our world with grace and benevolence. At his best, he embodied an ideal that scholars and academicians should aspire to achieve. He is not only a man for all seasons, but a man especially for our time. In this light, the Faculty of Arts and Letters has wisely chosen Professor Mary Racelis, a distinguished scholar, research scientist, and academician. Like St. Thomas More, Professor Racelis embodies clear-sighted realism and a passion for great learning. Professor Racelis not only made us learn about our past, understand our present, but more importantly, contemplate and hope for a brighter future. On behalf of the administration of the Faculty of Arts and Letters, we would like to thank our guests, faculty members, and students for attending this year's 52nd St. Thomas More Lecture. May we request everyone to join us in the singing of the Faculty of Arts and Letters hymn and the UST hymn.
Carved from the mighty rock of faith, shaped by traditions of old, steered by God's guiding hands towards farther shores of our dreams. Fitful vessel on the high seas, searching undaunted and free. Sunlit decks ring with voices resounding in one hymn of praise. Life, love, and lore brimming full, tempered by His gentle hands. The seas lucent blue in a distant white, the mind's strong reason in the heart's delight. We are lovers of beauty, seekers after truth, pens ever geared for sweetness and light. Arts and letters, our glory and pride. God of all nations, merciful Lord of our restless beings, see with your golden lilies this fountain of purest light. Trace with the sails of the galleons the dream beyond our seeing. Touch with the flame of your kindness the gloom of our darkest night. Keep us in beauty and truth and virtues and passion and grace. Ever your valiant legions, imbued with unending grace, unending grace, unending grace.
Thank you, everyone. Please click the link to answer our evaluation for this event. Thank you and good day.